They said Maple Creek was idyllic, a perfect small town where everyone was friendly. They didn't mention some greetings come with a badge, a shove, and a brutal lesson in who really belongs. The air in Maple Creek was supposed to be different, cleaner. That's what my brother David told me over the phone, his voice buzzing with the kind of civic pride only a small-town sheriff could have. "You'll love it, Marcus," he'd said. "It's a world away from the city. People still say hello on the street." He was right. In my first hour walking down the idyllic Main Street, with its antique shops and a bakery venting the warm scent of cinnamon, I'd received 7 friendly nods and 3 good mornings. It felt nice, deceptively nice. I was leaning against a brick wall, texting a picture of the town's gazebo to our mom, telling her I'd arrived safely. That's when a shadow fell over my phone. I looked up into a pair of mirrored sunglasses that reflected a distorted, wide-angle version of me. The man wearing them was built like a refrigerator, his uniform stretched taut across his chest and shoulders. The name tag read, Miller. "Can I help you, son?" he asked. The word son was laced with something that wasn't paternal. It was a verbal pat-down. I gave him an easy smile, the kind I'd perfected for situations just like this. The non-threatening, everything-is-fine smile. "No thank you, officer. Just moved to town, sending a picture to my mom." He didn't smile back. His jaw worked silently for a moment as his eyes scanned me from my new sneakers up to my clean haircut. "Moved to town, huh? Haven't seen you around." "Just got here this morning. My brother lives here. David." I left his last name off, left his title off. There was no need to pull rank that didn't belong to me. It always made things worse. "David," he repeated, the name tasting like something unfamiliar in his mouth. "Right. And what are you doing just standing here?" The friendly nods and good mornings from an hour ago suddenly felt like a distant memory from another town. "I was texting my mom," I said again, my smile tightening at the edges. "Is there a problem?" "We've had some reports of suspicious activity. Individuals. Casing businesses." He gestured vaguely with his thumb towards the jewelry store a few doors down. "You fit the description." I almost laughed. It was a bitter, hollow sound that caught in my throat. I fit the description. Of course I did. I was a 6'2" black man in a town that was, from my limited observation, about 99% white. I was the description. "Officer, I assure you, I'm just admiring your town square." "I'm going to need to see some ID," he said, his voice flat. A command, not a request. This was the crossroads, the moment where a day could either continue on its pleasant path or swerve violently into a ditch. I'd been here before. I knew the script. You comply. You keep your hands slow and visible. You don't make any sudden moves. You swallow your pride until you can't taste it anymore. "Of course," I said, my voice steady. "It's in my back pocket. I'm going to reach for it now." Slowly. I turned my body slightly, my right hand moving with exaggerated slowness towards my jeans. My fingers had just brushed the worn leather of my wallet when Miller's entire demeanor shifted. The bored authority sharpened into active aggression. "Hands!" "I said hands where I can see them," he barked, his voice suddenly a cannon shot in the quiet morning air. My hand froze. "Officer, I was just getting my ID, like you asked." "You were reaching. Don't you lie to me." He took 2 quick steps forward, closing the distance between us in an instant. There was no time to react, no time to even process what was happening. One of his hands, big as a catcher's mitt, slammed into the center of my chest. It wasn't a push to create distance. It was a shove meant to dominate, to put me down. My back hit the brick wall hard, the impact jarring my teeth. The phone slipped from my other hand, clattering onto the sidewalk with a sickening crack. "I'm not going to tell you again," he snarled, his face inches from mine. I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. A woman walking her poodle on the other side of the street stopped and stared, her hand flying to her mouth. A couple of teenagers outside the bakery fell silent. This wasn't just a stop anymore. This was a spectacle. My blood ran cold, then hot with a furious, helpless rage. "My wallet!" I said through gritted teeth. "You asked for my ID." "You people always have an excuse," he spat. And then he shoved me again. Harder this time. My feet tangled. The world tilted sideways. I flailed for a moment, a clumsy ballet of surprise and gravity, before I went down. My shoulder hit the pavement first, followed by my head, the impact a dull, sickening thud that echoed inside my skull. Gravel scraped against my cheek and the palms of my hands. For a second, all I could see were the cracks in the sidewalk, a constellation of gray lines under a sky that had suddenly grown too bright. The weight of a heavy boot planted itself firmly in the small of my back, followed by the crushing pressure of a knee. Miller's voice was a triumphant growl in my ear. "Now you'll learn some respect. Welcome to Maple Creek." Pain lanced through my ribs. Humiliation was a physical weight, pressing me into the concrete. All the air was forced from my lungs. But through the haze of shock and pain, one thought, one name, burned like a hot coal in my mind. David, my brother, the sheriff. He had to know. This couldn't be happening in his town. I twisted my head, the rough pavement scraping my skin raw. I tried to gasp out the words, to make this stop. My brother," I choked out, the words tasting like dust and blood. "Sheriff. David." Miller just laughed, a short, ugly bark. He leaned down, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, mocking whisper right by my ear. "Oh, I'm sure he is. Listen, pal. Your brother can't help you now. He was wrong. My brother could help me." The thought was a flicker of defiance in a storm of humiliation. But right now, my brother was a name, an abstract concept. This 250-pound wall of muscle and prejudice on my back was my reality. The world had shrunk to a 4-inch square of concrete and my own ragged breathing. I could hear the whispers from the sidewalk, the scrape of the poodle's nails as its owner pulled it away, not wanting her precious pet to witness such ugliness. The silence of the other onlookers was a verdict, a collective decision not to get involved. In my brother's town. "You're gonna learn real quick we don't play games here," Miller grunted, shifting his weight. A sharp electric pain shot up my spine. "Now where's this ID you were so eager to show me?" I couldn't answer. The air was gone from my lungs. I tried to gesture with my head towards my back pocket, the one he was standing a foot away from. He seemed to take my silence as insolence. "Not talking now, are you?" With another grunt he reached down himself. A rough hand snaked into my back pocket, clumsy and invasive. His fingers fumbled for a moment before closing around my wallet. He ripped it out with a force that tore the corner of my jeans. The sound of the fabric giving way was surprisingly loud in the tense silence. I heard him flip it open. "Let's see who we're dealing with today," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "Marcus. King." He said my name slowly, drawing it out. "From the city. Figures." I waited. The gears in his head had to be turning, however slowly. David's last name was King, too. It was a common enough name, sure, but in a town this small, married to the title of sheriff, it shouldn't be that hard of a puzzle to solve. "All right, Mr. King," he said, the sarcasm thick as molasses. He snapped the wallet shut. "You can save the 'my brother's the sheriff' routine. I've heard it all before. Now are you going to tell me what you were really doing outside that jewelry store?" The hope that had flickered inside me died, turning to a cold, hard stone in my gut. He wasn't just aggressive, he was stupid, a dangerous combination. This man didn't just see a potential suspect, he saw a story he'd already written in his head, and he was just trying to force me into the role. "I told you," I rasped, my cheek pressed against the filth of the sidewalk. "I just moved here. Ask my brother. Ask Sheriff David King." I emphasized his full name and title this time, praying a light bulb would finally switch on over his thick skull. Instead, he just pressed his knee down harder. My ribs screamed in protest. "You've got a real smart mouth on you, you know that? One more word about the sheriff, and I'm adding resisting arrest to the charges." Charges? What charges? For standing on a public sidewalk? For being black in Maple Creek? The absurdity of it all was dizzying. David had described this place as a haven, a place where he was building a better, fairer community. He was so proud of the work he was doing, the trust he was building. And here was one of his own officers, tearing it all down on a Tuesday morning over a text message. Just as I was about to risk saying my brother's name again, no matter the consequence, a subtle shift occurred. The crushing weight on my back lessened, just a fraction. Miller had gone still. I couldn't see him, but I could feel the change in the air. The confident, brutish pressure was replaced by a sudden, rigid tension. "What does your ID say your address is?" he asked, but his voice was different. The bluster was gone. There was a thin, tight note of something else. Confusion? No, it was more than that. It was the dawning chill of realization. "I haven't had a chance to change it yet," I said, my voice hoarse. "It's still my city address. I'm staying with David, at his house, 142 Oak Street." That was David's address, the sheriff's address. I felt Miller's entire body go rigid above me. The knee pressing my spine into the pavement suddenly felt weightless as he lifted it completely. He took a clumsy step back. I heard him swallow, a loud, dry gulp. "King," he whispered, the name now a question, a dreadful prayer. He was looking at my ID again, I was sure of it, staring at the name, staring at my face, and finally connecting the dots. He probably saw David every single day. He knew my brother's face, his features, and now he was looking at a younger, slightly less weathered version on a plastic card, and the world was tilting under his feet, just like it had under mine a few minutes ago. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. Then it was broken by the crunch of tires pulling up to the curb nearby. A car door opened and slammed shut with a sound of crisp authority. Heavy, familiar footsteps approached, steady and unhurried. They stopped just a few feet away. A shadow fell over me, eclipsing Miller's. And then a voice cut through the air, a voice I'd known my entire life. It wasn't loud. It wasn't yelling. It was something far more terrifying. It was calm, controlled, and colder than a winter grave. "Miller, get your hands off my brother. Now." The world came into focus with a painful clarity. The name Miller hung in the air, not as a name tag, but as a judgment. The officer who had been a mountain of unchecked authority on my back just seconds ago seemed to shrink. I heard a strangled sound escape his throat, something between a gasp and a whimper. He scrambled backward, his boots scraping clumsily on the concrete as if the ground beneath me had suddenly become electrified. I pushed myself up slowly, my body a symphony of aches. My shoulder throbbed, my ribs felt bruised and tender, and my cheek was a raw, stinging mess. I got to my knees, then shakily to my feet, bracing one hand against the rough brick wall. The small crowd of onlookers, who had been a silent jury, were now staring with wide, fascinated eyes, their allegiance shifting with the tide of power. They weren't looking at me anymore. They were looking at my brother. David stood there, a bulwark of calm fury. He was in his full uniform, the crisp brown fabric immaculate, the star on his chest glinting in the morning sun. He hadn't aged a day since I'd last seen him 6 months ago, but the lines around his eyes were deeper, etched by the weight of his office. Right now those eyes, usually so warm and full of life, were chips of flint. They were fixed on Miller. "Sheriff," Miller stammered, holding my wallet out like a peace offering. He was pale under his tan, the color draining from his face. We had a report. A man fitting a description." David didn't even glance at the wallet. He took a deliberate step forward, and Miller flinched, taking an involuntary step back. "A description of what? Officer Miller? A man with my family's cheekbones? Or a description that conveniently fits any black man you happen to see?" The question was sharp, precise, and it left no room for evasion. Miller's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air. David's gaze finally shifted to me. His hard expression softened for a fraction of a second, concern flickering in his eyes as he took in my scraped face, the dirt on my clothes, the way I was leaning on the wall for support. But then the mask of command snapped back into place. He turned his head slightly, his voice dropping but losing none of its edge. "Sarah," he said, speaking to the female deputy, who had just gotten out of the passenger side of his patrol vehicle. "Take statements from everyone." His eyes swept across the onlookers, who suddenly looked very interested in their shoes. "And get that phone. Bag it as evidence." Sarah, a young woman with a determined set of her jaw, nodded crisply. "Yes, Sheriff." She moved with an efficiency that made Miller look even more oafish and incompetent. David turned his full attention back to the officer. "You put your hands on him." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, cold and damning. "He was non-compliant, Sheriff," Miller pleaded, his voice cracking. He was reaching for the ID you demanded." I cut in, my own voice rough with anger and pain. "I told you what I was doing." David held up a hand, silencing me without looking at me. His focus remained laser-sharp on Miller. "You shoved him to the ground, in the middle of Main Street, in front of half the town." He took another slow, deliberate step forward. He was invading Miller's space, using his height and presence to methodically dismantle the other man's composure. "Tell me, Officer Miller, in what part of your training did it say that was standard procedure for a man who was casing a jewelry store by texting his mother in the town square?" Miller was sweating now, beads of moisture popping up on his forehead and upper lip. "Sheriff, with all due respect, you weren't here, you didn't see—" "I see what's in front of me now," David interrupted, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "I see my brother, who I invited to this town, who I promised would be safe here, with his face scraped up and dirt on his clothes. And I see one of my officers who seems to have forgotten the oath he took to protect and serve all members of this community." He was close enough now to reach out and touch Miller. The mirrored sunglasses seemed like a flimsy defense against the sheer force of David's anger. David held out his hand, not for the wallet, for something else. "Your badge, Miller, and your weapon." The color drained completely from Miller's face. He looked as if David had just sentenced him to death. "Sheriff, please, it was a mistake. A misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding is when you give someone wrong directions to the post office," David said, his voice deadly quiet. "Assaulting a civilian, my brother, is not a misunderstanding. It's a choice. You made your choice. Now give them to me." For a horrifying second, I thought Miller might refuse. I saw a flash of defiance, of cornered animal desperation in his eyes, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared, extinguished by the unyielding steel in my brother's gaze. With trembling hands, Miller unclipped his service weapon from its holster and handed it over. Grip first. David took it with practiced ease and passed it to Sarah without taking his eyes off Miller. Then, with even more fumbling, Miller unpinned the silver badge from his uniform. It seemed to catch on the fabric, a final futile act of resistance. He finally tore it free and placed it in David's waiting palm. David closed his hand around it, the metal edges pressing into his skin. "Go wait in my vehicle," he commanded. "We are going back to the station. You and I are going to have a very, very long talk." Defeated, Miller turned and trudged toward the patrol car, a man stripped of his armor and his authority. He wouldn't even look at me. As Sarah started to calmly interview the poodle lady, David finally turned to me, the anger in his face receding, replaced by a deep, weary concern. "You okay, Marcus?" he asked, his voice now gentle. He put a hand on my shoulder, the same spot where Miller had shoved me, but his touch was firm, steadying. "I'll live," I said, wincing as I straightened up. "Welcome to Maple Creek, huh?" A bitter smile touched his lips. "I'm so sorry, man. This isn't what I wanted for you. This isn't what this town is supposed to be." "He didn't even hesitate, David," I said, the shock finally giving way to the cold, hard reality of it. "He saw me, and he decided. That was it. End of story." David's jaw tightened. He looked from me to the patrol car where Miller sat with his head in his hands, and then up at the picturesque clock tower on Main Street. He looked like a king surveying a kingdom he suddenly wasn't sure he could control. "The story's not over yet," he said grimly. "I'm the sheriff. I'll handle this. I promise you." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But as I watched Sarah approach the teenagers from the bakery, who were now whispering excitedly and pointing. I knew it wasn't that simple. David could handle Miller. But Miller wasn't the disease. He was just a symptom. And as if to prove my point, a sleek black sedan pulled up behind David's patrol car. The passenger door opened, and a man in a perfectly tailored gray suit stepped out. He was older, with silver hair and a face that looked like it was carved from granite. He surveyed the scene, me, David, the disgraced officer in the car, with a look of cold, calculating disapproval. I recognized him instantly from the photos in David's office. It was Mayor Thompson, and he did not look happy. He walked straight up to David, completely ignoring me. "Sheriff," he said, his voice smooth but with an undertone of sharp steel. "I just got a call from Mrs. Gable about one of your officers harassing a citizen. Now I arrive to find you disarming him in the street. What in God's name is going on here?" David didn't turn his back on me, but his entire posture became a shield, a wall between me and the mayor's polished disapproval. He looked Mayor Thompson dead in the eye, his voice low and even, but carrying the weight of the badge Miller had just surrendered. "Mayor, what's going on is that one of my officers just assaulted a man for the crime of standing on a sidewalk while black." He gestured with his head toward me. "That man is my brother, Marcus King. He's been in our town for less than 2 hours." The mayor's perfectly composed face faltered. His eyes flicked to me, really seeing me for the first time. He saw the scrape on my cheek, the dirt on my jeans, the fury in my eyes. The political calculus in his head was almost audible as he recalibrated from a generic, unfortunate incident to a PR nightmare involving the sheriff's own family. "Your brother?" Thompson stammered, his composure cracking. "Sheriff, I think perhaps we should discuss this in a more private setting. There's no need to air department laundry on Main Street." He tried for a conspiratorial tone, the kind of voice men in power use to signal that a problem is about to be swept under a very expensive rug. "No," David said, the word cutting through the mayor's suggestion like a surgeon's scalpel. "This happened on Main Street. The laundry is already aired. My brother was publicly assaulted and humiliated. Justice will be just as public." "Now let's not be hasty," the mayor began, taking a step closer and lowering his voice. "A lawsuit could be damaging. For the town. For you. A simple misunderstanding." That was it. That was the word that broke my silence. Misunderstanding? I pushed myself off the wall, ignoring the protest from my ribs. I looked straight at the mayor, letting him see every ounce of my anger. He shoved me to the ground before I could even get my wallet out. He called me, "You people." "Tell me, Mayor Thompson, what part of that is a misunderstanding?" The mayor looked taken aback, unused to being addressed so directly by someone he considered a problem to be managed. He looked to David for help, but found none. David's gaze was unwavering. "There will be no lawsuit, Mayor, because there will be no cover-up. Miller is on administrative leave, effective immediately. His weapon and badge are in my possession. There will be a full and transparent internal investigation, led by me. And I can tell you the conclusion right now. Officer Miller is not fit to wear a badge in Maple Creek. He will be terminated." The finality in David's voice was absolute. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a declaration. Mayor Thompson stared at him, his jaw tight. He knew he was beaten. To fight this, to defend Miller against the sheriff's own brother, would be political suicide. The story was too clean, too damning. He straightened his suit jacket, a gesture of retreat disguised as composure. "Do what you have to do, Sheriff," he said, his voice clipped. He gave me one last unreadable look before turning on his heel and getting back into his sedan. As the car pulled away, I felt like I could finally take a full breath. The rest of the morning was a blur of procedure. David drove me back to the station himself after Sarah had finished with the witnesses. He sat me down in his office, got me a bottle of water, and then went to deal with Miller. I could hear the low murmur of their voices through the closed door, but not the words. It didn't take long. When David came back into his office, his face was grim but resolved. "It's done," he said, slumping into the chair behind his desk. "He's fired." He admitted he overreacted, tried to say he was having a bad day. "A bad day," I repeated, the words tasting like ash. "He almost broke my ribs because he was having a bad day." "I know." David leaned forward, his elbows on his desk, his expression pained. "Marcus, I brought you here because I wanted to prove a place like this could exist. A place that's better, fairer. Today it feels like I was just lying to both of us." I looked at my brother, at the heavy star on his chest, and the even heavier weight on his shoulders. The anger I felt towards Miller was a hot, sharp thing. But what I felt in that office was more complicated. I'd seen the worst of this town in Officer Miller. But I'd also seen the best of it in Sheriff King. "No, you weren't," I said, and the words surprised me with their certainty. "You weren't lying." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the town square. The poodle lady was walking by again. The teenagers were back at the bakery. The world kept turning. Any town, anywhere, is going to have a Miller in it. Guys who see the world a certain way and refuse to change. The question isn't whether they exist. It's about what the people in charge do about it. I turned back to him. "You didn't hesitate. You didn't try to smooth it over for the mayor. You did the right thing, David. Right there in the street for everyone to see. That matters. It matters more than the cinnamon rolls and the friendly nods." A slow smile spread across his face, the first genuine one I'd seen since he'd arrived on the scene. It was tired, but it was real. "You sound like a sheriff's brother." "Just an idea," I said, walking back to the desk. "Maybe you need to find some more deputies who look like me. Might cut down on the number of misunderstandings." David laughed, a real, full laugh this time. The tension in the room finally broke. "That's the best idea I've heard all day." He stood up and came around the desk, pulling me into a hug that was careful of my sore ribs. "I'm glad you're here, Marcus. Even after all this." "Me too," I said, and I meant it. The clean air of Maple Creek still held the bitter taint of what had happened. But standing here, in my brother's office, I realized he wasn't just promising a better town. He was building it. Brick by brick, action by action, starting right here today, with me. The cracks in the pavement outside were still there, but for the first time I felt like I was standing on a solid foundation.